I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
There are 63 seats in the Nevada legislature, but with over 1,000 lobbyists registered in the current legislative session, you kind of have to wonder who's running the show in Carson City. Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we're joined by Tabitha Mueller. She's the Capitol Bureau Chief at the Nevada Independent. Tabitha is covering the ledge session in Carson right now, so we ask her, how much sway do lobbyists have? And the big question, could we even have a Nevada legislature without lobbyists? It's Monday, March 31st. I'm David Figler, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Tabitha, what kind of industries and organizations are up in Carson City lobbying this session? I kind of want to get the sense of the range of causes and people who are up there.
So I think that you have a wide range of people and causes from all over the political spectrum and also all over industries in Nevada, right? You have unions, you have gaming industry, obviously, but you also have some pretty, I'm trying to think of the best way to frame this, but you have some pretty hyper-focused ones as well, right? There are TikTok lobbyists, there's lobbyists related to bounce house legislation.
Big bounces up there, yeah.
And I think that what you have to understand is if anybody comes and lobbies for a bill or a measure or talks to a lawmaker, they have to register as a lobbyist. And there's unpaid lobbyists and there's paid lobbyists, and all of that has to be disclosed.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. Paid lobbyists, non-paid lobbyists. So if I were to go up there and I had a certain cause that I'm really interested in, like kill the lottery or something like that, I would have to register. I just pulled that one randomly. But yeah, it is interesting how many people are up there. And then the cities, the municipalities, they're all represented in different formulations, and the prosecutors and the defense attorneys and public defenders.
ACLU, they're all up there. It's sort of a who's who of the Nevada political world too, to a certain extent. And of course, Carson City is interesting because it's not Vegas and it's not Reno, which are the two kind of main population centers here in Nevada. It's sort of this weird third space, right? But it is our state capital, and there is an option for citizens here in Las Vegas to go down to the government building and testify there if they don't have an ability to make it up to the legislature in Carson City as well.
Right. Now, testifying is different from lobbying. Lobbying suggests a little more kind of like knocking on the door and saying, excuse me, assembly person, may I speak with you about this topic?
Right. And it's usually advocating for a very specific measure or working on the details of a bill, right? You can testify and not have to worry about that either. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the lobbyists and how much they sort of matter in the scheme of how laws get made. So I do wonder, with so many paid lobbyists offering up their services, how do interested people who want a lobbyist for them pick the person who's going to be their lobbyist?
So I think one of the things you have to understand is that sometimes people will get multiple lobbyists, right? So in 2023, we saw that I think there was something like 18 or 19 lobbyists for the Oakland A's, right? Across a couple of different firms and different people. And it kind of depends on what you're looking for if you're looking to kind of get a lobbyist up there. Individual companies will also have their own lobbyists, right? As we see with some bigger industries here in Nevada.
Now with the A's, that's kind of interesting. There was some controversy last year as to who was and wasn't a lobbyist, even though they were advocating for the A's to get that public money. Do you remember that controversy? With whether or not Jeremy Aguero and Steve Hale were supposed to be registered as lobbyists?
Yeah, so there was questions, if somebody consults on it, do they have to be labeled as a lobbyist? And that's every single session, right? And there's all sorts of political consultants that work on different things or have different pieces kind of going through the process. And so that's sort of the unspoken sort of question mark, right? In every session, like you said, questions were raised about should Jeremy Aguero have to register as a lobbyist because, he worked on this piece of legislation and he was saying, I'm just making this better. And, here's an economic analyst's perspective on this issue. And I think that question has not been fully addressed either. And we know, too, that, you have political consultants who work with the caucuses that don't have to register as lobbyists. And there's all sorts of interesting legal, ethical, moral questions about this.
Yeah, I mean, and as we're talking about it, hopefully some of those will come up. I guess it sort of begs the question, and maybe we should just get very fundamental. What is a lobbyist, and what does a day in the life of a lobbyist look like?
So I think a lobbyist is somebody that is working on behalf of an organization or an entity or a person or, for a cause, right? So you can have lobbyists that are working for nonprofits that are kind of going up to the legislature. For example, let's say you're a lobbyist working in children's behavioral health care, right? You are looking at getting some laws passed to help your nonprofit with children's behavioral health care. Maybe it's you're trying to make sure that legislation that would hinder the work that you're doing doesn't get passed, or you're trying to make sure that lawmakers address a problem that's, in the population that you're working with. Everyone has their own different styles, right? When you're interviewing me, we have a rapport. If you're interviewing someone else, maybe you ask questions in a different way. And I think lobbying, it's very similar. You walk up to people or, you have conversations on the side. Maybe you get, you're like, we have to change this. We're super mad about it, but everyone has their own style and flavor. And you kind of approach lawmakers and really work on things. I think that the ideal for most folks is to kind of get stuff done behind the scenes, right? Less fiery outbursts in committee hearings and those kinds of things. I mean, take a look at the Uber trial lawyers deal, right? Our reporter, Eric Neugebauern, who's up at the legislature with me, had a fantastic story that recently published about Uber and the trial lawyers reaching this big compromise in the form of a piece of legislation that dropped on the assembly floor recently. And he talked about how there were, backroom conversations and people working together to say, okay, what can we agree on as far as this decision? What needs to be changed? And I think that's how a lot of it works is, okay, here's a compromise, here's a solution, let's reach common ground, and then let's work with lawmakers so that maybe not everybody is happy, but compromise has been found, right?
Okay. And so those lobbyists have a hand in shaping the actual bill language, either from the onset or, like you just said, in this Uber example, as the legislation is kind of moving forward.
Well, and the other thing that I think is important to note is obviously the legislature that we have has term limits. And so you have a certain cycle, right? You could only be in office for a certain amount of time, but anyone can be a lobbyist for however long, right? There's no time limit on that. So often lobbyists have this institutional knowledge in the building that
See,
that also comes into play here.
yeah, and you're getting ahead of me in talking about like the pros and cons of it. But I want to, before we get to that, I kind of want you to shine a little light for me, because we talk about these lobbyists in this sort of amorphous back hallway. We don't know who they are, although we could go and look at the list of all the names. I'm just wondering, who are the most influential lobbyists, and what do they offer that maybe sets them apart from some of the lesser known ones?
Oh man, it's so tough for me to try and name this is the most influential lobbyist because so many lobbyists specialize in certain areas, right? Or they work for certain organizations that have a sway or, that hold kind of authority in that building. I think that when we're talking about who these folks are and who has sway, you really have to think about, are they former lawmakers? Because a lot of former lawmakers do go into lobbying, right? So
Who are the most prominent names of former lawmakers who do lobbying now?
One of those is a former Assembly Speaker, Jason Frierson. Another is former Republican Assembly member Tom Roberts, and both of them were well liked when they were in office. They have a lot of existing relationships, and they're in the building having those conversations, and they have pre-existing relationships with a lot of lawmakers. So that's one element of holding sway there, right? You also have, you think about some of the big names like R&R Partners is one. For example, the Ferraro Group has a lot of sway up in northern Nevada. Carraro's. I mean, I could go through a full list. Wadhams is another big kind of firm name up there. But there's also some newer firms too. And as you have newer lawmakers, they might identify more with some of the younger lobbyists, right? It's a political dynamic that happens. But here's the thing. All of this is available on the legislative website. Everyone has there's reports, there's exactly who lobbied for whom. It was funny because I was in the building and former state senator Ben Kekeffer, who has also served as chief of staff for Governor Joe Lombardo, walked into the building to register as a lobbyist because he had to talk to a lawmaker about something with the city of Reno, and he said he didn't expect to have to register, but because he talked to a lawmaker about an issue, he had to come in and sign up as a lobbyist, which I thought was just this fascinating piece where once it crosses a certain line, you have to be a lobbyist and you have to register.
And I think it's so we could have this very discussion and talk about, some degree of transparency of how our laws are actually created. If you think you know everything there is to know about Las Vegas, well, think again. Duck Duck Shed is a 3-day festival where the city's true story comes to life. From April 24th through the 27th, the Neon Museum brings you exclusive tours, expert-led panels, and engaging conversations with the architects, designers, and storytellers who built and are still building Las Vegas into the entertainment capital of the world. Duck Duck Shed, it's a phrase from the seminal architecture book Learning from Las Vegas. I'm excited to have been invited to give a talk at the fest about how we do and don't continue to learn lessons about our city's unique design. So, whether you're an industry professional or just love the city, Duck Duck Shed offers a deeper look into our growth, culture, and history. Tickets are on sale now at duckduckshed.com. Register today and be part of this one-of-a-kind celebration of Las Vegas. Don't miss out.
Take me out to the ball game.
What are you doing?
Did you know DirecTV has the most MLB games?
So, you're singing.
Yeah, they put your favorite teams front and center right when you turn it on. Buy me some cold cuts and flapjacks.
Those aren't even the words.
I'm allergic to peanuts.
Stream DirecTV, home of the most MLB games. Visit DirecTV.com. Claim based on total games offered on national and regional sports networks. RSNs available with choice package or higher. Availability of RSNs varies by zip code and package.
Tabitha, if you know, what kind of money exchanges hands here? Like, how expensive is it to hire a top lobbyist in the state of Nevada?
I actually do not know the answer to that question. I would imagine that it is very expensive.
Yeah, I'm guessing Uber's not trading rides for its lobbyists.
No, I mean, you have to think about it. I mean, these are folks that are often, some of them are attorneys. They're working for lobbying firms that they have a lobbying angle, but they also have an attorney side. I'm sure that there's some folks that have dual representation as well. But you're pouring over thousands of bills that are coming through the legislature. You're asking for bill tracking. You're getting reports back. You're having conversations. I mean, that's not a cheap venture. I am absolutely certain.
Yeah, no, I know lawyers like to bill. Let me ask you this question, because this kind of comes up sometimes too. Do lobbyists ever represent conflicting interests? Like, is there a single lobbyist for Big Milk who also represents the Society for Lactose Intolerance? That kind of thing? That was my joke.
There are definitely lobbyists where I think that there are sometimes that things come into conflict, and then there's a disclosure period and there's conversations about that. And I know some folks who've had to say, hey, we need to take a step back, or, I'm representing this client, but this isn't having an issue. You know what I mean? I think that that's part of the conversation, but ideally you wouldn't be representing, you wouldn't be on the stand saying, we love lactose-free, or we love lactose-free milk, and then Big Milk is saying, no, we hate this, right? I don't think that would go over very well with lawmakers if you get up one after the other. The same person, yeah.
So what is the disclosure? Because, I could see somebody representing, like a housing rights organization, but also representing landlords and developers. And where does the disclosure come in? Which hat they're wearing at any given time?
Well, when they get up to testify on a bill publicly, right, there's I am representing this organization. Like most lobbyists will say that I'm here on behalf of insert organization name here.
Right.
But also, I think some of that comes back into conversations with their clients as well. And they have that list that is publicly available so you can see who everyone is representing. And I think when a lobbyist goes in to talk to a lawmaker on behalf of an organization or they're representing someone, they tell that lawmaker, it's not just I am here as this person, I am here to have that conversation
Okay.
on
So,
behalf of.
yeah, well, that makes more sense. I am curious how much of that happens up there because, I would imagine a greedy lobbyist doesn't want to turn away any business. So I would hope that they do that disclosure. Now, I want to get back to a point that you made so cleverly, Tabitha, because you anticipate my every word. Lobbyists often point out that it is their expertise that is invaluable in a citizen legislature where there are these term limits. As you mentioned, there is a turnover of people who might have very great ties to a particular issue and then they're just sort of gone. So what are some examples of lawmaking where this argument is borne out?
I think you can see it in the healthcare industry. I cover a lot of healthcare related legislation. That legislation is dense. It is very particular. It can be very nitpicky. I think you'll see there'll be consultations on things. There'll be conversations about, hey, here's where hospitals are on this, or here is where big pharma is, or here's where the pharmacy benefits managers, who are kind of that middleman in the drug pricing process that no one can quite describe who they are. But
Hmm.
but those lobbyists have a deep and intricate understanding of the healthcare system from their perspectives and the clients that they represent. And so I think sometimes it comes in that. Sometimes it's a conversation about, hey, this law that you want to do, it actually won't work because there's another law that is already in place. For example, we see every session conversations about cannabis and gaming locations, right? You can't have them, you can't
Right,
have it
right.
there. But some lawmakers might not be aware of that. And so I think that there's also a familiarity with the process and how things work. When you're in the legislature for the first time, you're kind of learning where the bathrooms are. And I think that work applies to everybody who's in that building to a certain extent, or you're learning how the processes flow. And I think that obviously you have staff and the Legislative Counsel Bureau who have been there for a long time typically, but you also have lobbyists who have been there for a while as well. I know for me, at least, when I'm looking to get an understanding about a bill or a process or something that's going through, some of the folks that I consult are lobbyists because
Hmm.
they understand the process. Now you have to make sure that, both of you are understanding of, making sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's and triple verifying information. But
Right.
oftentimes lobbyists can be really helpful in my job.
Now, you mentioned the Legislative Counsel Bureau or the LCB. They're the ones that are tasked if, like, a lawmaker says, I kind of want this law to work. They're the ones that help them do the language. But do lobbyists interact with the LCB?
I think lobbyists mostly just interact with lawmakers, but I know there'll be consultations on like, hey, like sometimes you'll see some bills come in, like here's a proposed draft, or let's have a conversation about this, before even the bill gets to the drafting phase at the Legislative Counsel Bureau side of it.
So, I mean, I am kind of wondering, you do make a good argument why lobbyists have this wealth of knowledge, especially institutional knowledge about all these topics. But on the other hand, I'm wondering if there might be a tipping point where legislators become too reliant on lobbyists. I mean, do we pay some kind of price for lobbyist participation in our democratic process?
I think that's always a concern. And I think advocates who have kind of said, hey, maybe term limits aren't always the best idea. And I know that folks across all sorts of industries get a little bit frustrated sometimes because you're not aware of the processes or you don't have a deep, in-depth knowledge of how the state budget works. Like that can kind of gum up the process sometimes when you're having those types of conversations. I also think when we talk about too much power, we also have to talk about the press corps when we're talking about the legislature, right? There are a
Go
very,
ahead, get
very,
on that soapbox. We're here for you.
I will get on this soapbox because
Sing
there are
your
very,
praises.
very few reporters that cover the legislature in an in-depth manner, right? I think that you see certain outlets that are up there, but over the years, the number of reporters covering the legislature has dwindled And I think that's actually a huge issue when we talk about transparency, when we talk about the legislative process, when we talk about who knows what's going on in the building or how it works. Like, I would love to see more reporters, more outlets devote resources to the legislature, because there is so much happening on any given day. It's impossible to cover it all. And it's impossible to keep track of every minute thing. Like, there are rules, there are regulations, but how do you verify that everyone is doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah, well, there's no public records request for the Nevada State Legislature. And I mean, there's doubly no record request for the lobbyists. So how do you find out, Tabitha?
I think some of it is you pay attention to what's going on. You check meeting agendas, you triple verify information, you talk to somebody, you make sure that you talk to somebody else. You always try and get as many different perspectives as you can to get to the truth. You watch some of those hearings, and you also look over and review meeting minutes, commissions, board hearings, all of those elements of what the legislature is, to kind of hold people accountable. But, it's even like, it, going back to the conversation that we had about former state senator Ben Kekeffer, right? He came in, he registered, he did what he was supposed to, but how do we verify that folks are following that? And there are different interpretations of the law, and there's questions about it. And we've done every session a sort of story about, like you mentioned, Jeremy Aguero, for example, who's an economist and analyst.
Well, he's an analyst.
He's an analyst for applied analysis, I should say.
Yeah.
And
he crunches numbers. He crunches numbers.
Kind of raising that insight, and kind of who are these people that are working behind the scenes. But if you're not in the building watching the process, you would have no idea who Jeremy Aguero might be, right? Or why he's relevant to this conversation.
Well, that sounds like a lot of work for a single journalist. I'm going to tell your boss, John Ralston, over at the Nevada Independent, to give you a raise, Tabitha, as we drive into the very last question. And that is kind of how I started the introduction. I mean, is there a version of the Nevada Citizen Legislature that functions well without lobbyists being involved?
I don't think so. I here's the thing, though, is lawmakers, you have to trust the lawmakers that you elect. And also, lobbyists know their industries, they know their clients. Sometimes they represent nonprofits, sometimes they represent bigger industries like NV Energy or Southwest Gas, right? But they're there to make the case and to look over the laws that are coming forward. If you don't have lobbyists, then I don't know necessarily. Sometimes you have to receive feedback on things. You have to have conversations from all sorts of different fields, right? For example, if you have pediatricians and doctors that are coming in to weigh in on legislation that would affect them, right? And when we have that conversation, it's also incumbent upon the legislators to make the best decision and to say, this is what my constituents need, this is what the state needs, weighing what they have heard from all sorts of groups who are involved in these processes.
Well, and, those lobbyists aren't beholden to any voters, but the elected officials are. So, if there is information that needs to be known about all this lobbying, I would hope that the elected officials do that. Is there any legislation that affects lobbyists that's bouncing around in this session?
I haven't seen anything that hasn't caught my eye necessarily on our radar at all. I do think part of this, too, is looking at where money is flowing from, right? We have a Follow the Money series that we do at the Nevada Independent, where we track how much money industries give to all of these different lawmakers. And part of that, too, is, we're working on a story right now, our gaming reporter Howard Stutz and I. And there's a bill that's coming out, SB 401, that has to do with some redevelopment stuff. And one of the proponents of the bill is the Grand Sierra Resorts in Reno. And so we got curious, did this lawmaker receive any money from Grand Sierra Resorts in Reno? And no, they didn't. But I think that's another verification, is how much money have folks received? Who has been talking to them? There are some public records that we can look at to get an idea of it.
Right. But, money received directly to a legislature may very well be different from tons of money spent on those lobbyists to get the job done too, right?
Right. And I would love to see how much people are paying. I would love to see the records of, how much people are being paid. We can see who's paying whom and who is working for whom. But we don't always know how much money is flowing from clients of lobbyists to them, right?
right? And how much of their own equity they're using to get something done. Well, Tabitha, I am so glad we have journalists like you bringing clarity to this very murky process. Thanks for joining us on CityCast Las Vegas.
Thank you for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? You could rate our show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky. Is there anything fun about talking about the Nevada legislature? Come
No,
on.
absolutely not.
Exactly.
We're all sleep deprived and hyped up on caffeine and just too many bills to talk about.